Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 8 and from 1CC9. We are presenting about Campus Library Database. First of all, we have to introduce our members first. My name is Devandra Nabana Yumanda.
And my name is Faza Rama Nugraha.
And my name is Bima Sakti Sumbaga.
Okay, next. In this slide, we will explain schema and tables. We have one schema is library and 5 tables. First is member, second is library officer, third is borrow, fourth is books, and fifth is written. And in this slide, there is ER diagram. There is 5 tables, member table, book table, written table, library officer table. And member can borrow book. Member to book, the relation is one to many. And borrow to book is many to many. And book can be written, the relation is many to one. And library officer serve member, the relation is one to many. Next, there is invoice tables database or schematic diagram. There's many primary key, member ID, borrow ID, officer ID, books ID, and therefore the foreign key.
In this slide, you will see the tables. And the tables have a many parts. The first is member. Member have a part member ID, member name, member address, study program, date of birth, place of birth, email, telephone number, and gender. Second is library officer. Officer ID, officer name, shift, date of birth, place, telephone number, gender, and officer ID. Third, have a borrow ID, officer ID, member ID, books ID, borrow date, amount of borrow, and return date. The fourth is book, books ID, books title, author, date of publish, book stock, and publisher. The fifth is return. The return have a books ID, member ID, officer ID, borrow ID, and fine of borrow. In validation perform, we have in member table, we have a validation. Validation member ID have a method. The method is primary key and is not null. And the data type is char5. The description is ID for its member. In validation member name, we have a method not null, data type for char50, description, name of its member. In member address, we have a method not null, data type for char50, description, address of member. In validation study program, we have a method not null, data type for char50, description, study program of member. In date of birth, we have a method not null, data type date, and the description is date of birth each member. In place of birth, we have a method not null. The data type is factor 15. The description is place of birth each member. In validation email, we have a method not null. The data type is factor 50, and the description is email member. Email member. In validation telephone number, we have a method not null. Data type chart 12, and the description telephone number member. And the validation gender, we have a method not null, data type char1, and description gender of member. In library officer table, we have a validation. officer ID. We have method primary key and not null. The data type is char5 and the description is ID of each officer. The validation is officer name and the method is not null. The data type is varchar50 and the description name of each officer. Next is validation shift. We have a method not null, the data type varchar50 and the description shift of each officer. In the validation date of birth, we have a method not null, the data type date, the description is date of birth each officer. In the place of birth, we have a method not null, the data type varchar 15, and the description place of birth is officer. In the validation telephone number, we have a method not null, the data type char 12, and the description telephone number of each officer. In the validation gender, we have a method not null, the data type char1, and the description gender of officer. And in the validation of the address, we have a method not null, the data type varchar50, and the description address of each officer. Next, in books table. In books table, we have a validation books ID. The method is primary key and is not null. The data type is char5. The description is the ID for each book. The validation of book's title. The method is not null. The data type is varchar50. The description is title of each book. The validation author. The method is not null. The data type is varchar15. The description author of each book. The validation is date of published. The method is not null. Data type date. Description date of date published of book. And the validation book stocks, we have a method not null, data type char3, description stock of book. And in the validation publisher, we have method not null, data type varchar50, and description book publisher.
Next is borrow table. The validation of borrow ID is with method primary key and not null, with data type char5, and the description is ID of each borrow. In validation officer ID, we have method foreign key and not null, with data type char5, and this description is ID of each officer. The validation member ID, our method is foreign key and not null, with data type char5, and description is ID of each member. In books ID, the method is foreign key and not null, with data type char5, and the description is ID of each book. The borrow date, the method is not null, and data type is date, and the description is date of borrowing book. The validation of amount of borrow, with method not null and data type is varchar2, and the description is loan amount. In return date, with method not null and data type is date, with description is date of returning book. The next is return table. The validation is books ID and method is foreign key not null, with data type char5, and the description is ID of each book. In member ID validation, the method is foreign key and not null, with data type char5, and the description is ID of each member. In officer ID, the method is foreign key and not null. Data type is char5, with description is ID of each officer. In borrow ID, the method is foreign key and not null. The data type is char5, with description is ID of each borrowing. The last is find of borrow, with method not null and data type integer, with description let return will be find. And That's all from us. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.